Hey, how you guys doing? It's produced from Brothers Comics. Welcome to the Marvel Hacks. It's our X-Men 97 recap, y'all. We are going to get almost up to date. We had teased it before, what we were going to do, and we're going to execute that plan very much like the NFL draft. On the line is Brother Beavis. Say what's happening.
Hey, what's up, yo?
Yes, this show is a first round pick, by the way. It might have a couple of flaws, not character flaws, but there's uh, only, I guess, lack of experience because there's not that many episodes. But the film they got on tape is first round quality. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Like in the pantheon of cartoons, you know, this definitely hits the ground running. I
Yeah,
mean, I think
it's
if
up there.
we had a short discussion, like Earth's Mightiest Heroes is up there, like Justice League got there, but they had to sit on the bench for a couple years to
Yeah,
kind of learn the position before they made the Pro Bowl for the first time.
yeah.
So yeah, no, this is great, and I think a lot of ways it fixes some, but then it is a different show from the first run, but like the production quality of it is so much better. Although there was some shaky aspects of episode 6.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so what we had teased was that when Life Death came on, part one, it ran in front of a Jubilee Sunspot and Mojo bit that, to be fair, we're not even really going to talk about because it it's not really worth talking about. It's Mojo. That's basically it. And then it's ran on the episode end of or in interspersed with episode 6 in between this other story, which we're going to get to tonight. So we're going to combine Life, Death 1 and 2 and talk about episode 6 with Charles and Lilandra and the Shi'ar and do all of those together. And then we're going to kind of lead into a lead about episode 7 because as I had texted y'all after I watched it, it was the first filler episode. Not saying that it was bad, but it was definitely filler.
Mm, I might challenge that.
Okay, we'll
Uh,
get to it at the end. That's fine. We'll get to it at the end.
I, it, wa- it was it was more, to me, it was more like a issue 0.
Mm.
Uh, it was the setup for the story to follow. So.
That's fine. Yeah. Filler. All right. Anyway, let's go, y'all. So it's our comic book inspiration for Life, Death Parts 1 and 2. It was at 186. I got a typo over there, and then 198. So that's the funny part here. Like, everybody's like, oh, it's Life, Death Part 1 and 2. But this story spanned not just the Storm and Forge love story, but there's a whole ass dire race uh Native American magical story that goes in between all of these issues. And again, however you feel about the life death parts of it, and I have a feeling about it, it
Mm,
it's definitely condensed. It probably, if you were going to do it, probably deserved more than the back end of an annual and interspersed in between another episode. Would you agree?
yeah. And again, like the thing that's hit me about this is they are just churning through, like, not only the number of stories, but the complexity of stories and the number and the way they're getting through it. My take was either like they were assuming they were going to get canceled
Mm,
before they finished the story, which at this point would be ridiculous because there's not another thing of this quality, I think, that they're putting out. Marvel are putting out, like, in any platform,
mm,
or they're trying to bridge between the classic era and the modern era and burn through this sort of dead period of like the 2000s, late 90s, whatever, just to try and get to where all of this stuff makes sense with the contemporary MCU.
right.
Because I think that's the thing is, right, you could still have X-Men stories playing out, but to get to maybe the kind of interaction or where where the rest of the MCU is, you kind of necessarily have to bring the X-Men into that future realm of storytelling.
Right. Yeah, it again, and I don't know if it's much as a criticism or it's just like, man, that was really fast that you told that story so quickly. It's had a lot more depth to it. But again, 10 episodes. They've already been approved for season 2. And I
Yeah.
think it's already in the can. We just have to wait for it to come out. And I'm sure I read something that they were saying that they would like to do another 2 seasons, kind of like back to back or whatever. And again, like most shows, cartoons, musicians, artists, or whatever, like a little is enough. And then once you start getting into that part where, hey, we want to produce it just because we can and we
Mhm.
should, then you start to lose the quality a little bit, which happened with the original cartoon.
Yeah.
They told a story and they were like, oh yeah, by the way, we got to do 2 more seasons after Dark Phoenix. What?
Yeah.
Never mind. Like, what's
And
the point?
that's, a lot of the first series fell apart because they were trying to tell the stories, but like subbing in different characters or not, like, because they did some semblance of like the Age of Apocalypse or things like
Hmm.
that, but it was like just with a patchwork of characters or just other stuff they'd made up in the background. So it got weird. Like you could kind of like draw a line between that and a comic book somewhere, but kind of not. So
Yeah.
it's they were, we were struggling to think about like what are the stories that they're what are they going to do, and
Hmm.
they've definitely like hit on some, even if it's just a significant issue or a significant storyline, they've definitely picked up some important stories or moments for different characters. But at this pace they are going to outrun the things
Yeah.
that are worth putting on a show for
Correct.
sure.
And you're gonna outrun the what I would call the standard people that are reading the. It's like wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
There's people that like stick with wrestling no matter what, and they're watching WWE now, and they might dip into AEW, and just because that's what their habit is, that's what it is. But it's a very small niche audience that we found out. There's not a real like crossover appeal for really wrestling now. I think
Yeah.
comics are the same way. There are people like us that enjoy reading the comic books that we grew up with and like, and every time we dip ourselves into AEW or WWE, it's just like, "Ugh,
Yeah.
maybe this isn't what I want. It looks like what I want, but it's not really what I want." And I think, oh yeah, we got to go through and tell these stories. We're gonna like get to we're already in Grant Morrison a little bit. That's iffy. But no, we're going to go past that into all these books where we were completely out and have
Mm-hmm.
no idea what the hell was happening. And I think that's probably the majority of comic book fans at this point. And now you're telling these stories to a very niche, small audience who, won't pop, wrestling term, when they see something that happens like straight from the comic book, which we're seeing now. So
Yeah.
that,
Would you think it's fair to say like that the best MCU, I guess either movies or shows, have been the ones that are more direct adaptations of things that have been in the comics? I was just thinking
yeah.
like Avengers is good, but it's not strictly a story per se. Avengers 2, again, not really. So, Captain America Winter Soldier, the origin stories, the Civil War to the extent that they pulled it off.
Mm,
Obviously, Infinity War, Endgame, a lot of the origin stories. I mean, those are kind of the best, and that
mm,
that makes me think like, okay, are you going to have told all the original stories in this cartoon over
right.
its two incarnations? And so when we do get the X-Men, are you going are you
Do you
going
have
to
anything
rehash
left?
those things, or are
Yeah.
you going to give us a new story, or what?
Yeah.
Or have they already earmarked a story that, like we said, is from the current books that it will be? That's what we're trying to get to. Hard to say.
Yeah. Again, we'll talk about it here in a second, but it feels like all of this is leading to Krakoa,
Hmm.
which would be, kind of the last modern era story that we've read. But, and following the writer that got fired on Twitter, he said to go back and watch One Man's Worth, which I think is from season 4, which they do like this BS Age of Apocalypse, or at least a
Hmm.
lot of the character designs are from that. And that's a Nimrod story with Fitzroy in the cartoon. And so, okay, but he had said that like, oh no, Age of Apocalypse would need like a whole season in and of itself, so we're not getting Age of Apocalypse. So again, there's a little bit of curiosity about how that, something that we talked about a lot of these Marvel Disney shows, can y'all stick the landing?
Hmm.
The TV shows have been more misses than hits in doing that. Cartoon might be a little bit easier to pull off because you're not dealing with the human whatever element. So I'm very curious, but yeah, I just for this version of this story, if you cared about this story, taking out dire wraiths and all of that stuff, you really kind of shortchanged it. And then the ending of it makes no sense compared to what the comic book is. But we're gonna talk about that too. All right. So part one of Life Death, Storm is recovering from her loss of her powers with Forge. You know, he kind of picked her up there. They even allude to, you know, what happened in Dallas. Well, what happened in Dallas is the freaking dire wraith stuff. But no diaries. Sorry, Hutch. No Rom either. And we, you know, we start to see their love story unfold. So I went back and read Life, Death 1 and 2. Forge was a dick. Like, he was terrible to her, minus the what we're going to reveal or whatever. But he was pretty awful to her as she was going through this life changing event.
Was it? Were we supposed to read it as tough love,
I
or just
guess
yeah?
it read like massive misogyny is what it read like in 2024. Um, but it you know she just couldn't, you know, get over this
Mhm.
idea. Essentially, like, kind of let me die, and he's like, you know, I love you, but shut the fuck up, get up, or get out of bed. Like, it's really bad. And that again, it reads like 1986 or whatever the hell it is, which is fine, but yeah, he's just not great, you know. And then we get that, we even get Storm in her, you know, her overalls in the cartoon, and she had them on in there, and their love story unfolds in the comic book over time, you know, with dinners and uh is swimming excursions, and in this it's like horseback riding and, you know, a little bit of wine too, because I thought Storm never had it before. Or is that in the comic? I can't even remember now. Where she
uh,
never drank wine
I
before.
think it was in the
It's in the
comic,
comic. Yeah, and she's
and
like,
what?
"Oh, it tickles."
And the first part was like in his like his skyscraper building or whatever, where
Yeah,
he
with
had
the
holograms all of
holograms.
yeah. All right,
Yeah,
so
yeah. I mean, again, however you feel about that actual story, it's a lot better with dire wraiths. Just saying, like, if you're just taking the love story part of that, it's not great. And because again, you have Chris Claremont. What the hell does he know about writing this kind of crap? And also, it has all the Native American stuff, and it gives him his, you know, his Canadian want to alleviate his Canadian native guilt by talking about Native American stuff. It's a lot. Not a one shit book. Anyway,
Chris Claremont, white guilt and black
yes,
sugar, brown sugar. You know, those two loves.
all mixed together. He was like, "Oh, oh, he's cooking." Yes, he is cooking something here. All right. So
Remember
yeah,
how
there.
when we were like in the early days of like the post giant size X Men, where like every villain they fought was
Yeah,
just wanted to hook up with Storm,
yeah. It's like, ooh,
like Dracula once said,
yeah,
Doctor Doom.
exactly.
Everybody was like
Dracula, Doom. Yeah, everybody was like, ooh, yeah. Anyway, that's awful. Okay, so again, a truncated story. We get the dire wraiths in there. It's and it goes all the way through, like from Life Death 1 to Life Death 2. I mean, there's a whole big story in there. I think Ramita was on the book for a few of those. I mean, it's a lot.
Mhm.
And then they condensed it into probably between both segments, call it 12 minutes, probably, maybe 15,
Yeah, it wasn't
maybe.
long.
Yeah, I mean, it goes all the way through. And then, you know, when we get to the adversary, which we're going to talk about here now, then that story is completely off. Where, you know, what's his friend's name? Nazi. We call him Maize. We call him
Man,
Corn.
nay.
Nazi, his Native
Yeah.
American friend from Vietnam, who, you know, has some lightweight jealousy himself, and he's the one that winds up unleashing the adversary into, you know, the human world. It's a lot going on in
Well,
this
I think
comic.
what if I'm not mistaken, he gets killed and then the adversary manifests through him. I don't
Okay.
think he unlocks. I don't think he's responsible for bringing the
Yeah.
adversary in, if I
Okay.
remember.
Yeah.
And
It's
speaking of, and maybe there's a slide on this, but they completely like they might have barely alluded to it, but they completely leave out like the Vietnam War when
mhm.
Forge, you know, opens up the portal and brings the adversary into the material plane to begin
Yeah.
with.
Yeah, I don't think I have a slide for it, but yeah, that. I think he
because they've
mentions the
already,
war.
like in this, they've said, he's already guilty of making the technology. Well, guess what? He's also guilty of bringing the
The
adversary into the
adversary,
story
yeah,
as well. Like he fucked everything up.
yeah. But I mean, they ride horses. They're in
Yep,
love, and
they do.
then there's the reveal. All right. So her lack of powers, and as it talks about later, her lack of having her powers and her bitterness from that, as well as Forge's guilt after it's discovered that he created the the bands that knocked off their power on Genosha, like his guilt over that and having built the government weapon that wound up taking her powers, that brings the adversary out that is attracted to all the bitterness and whatever. Her line about "I wish I was human" sometimes to Jean in episode 1 comes back to her, and it's alluded to that the reason that she's got all this self-pity and all of this, that's the reason that her powers are gone, not necessarily because
Mm.
of the weapon. So that's a bit of a dip from the comic book, that's for sure. What did you think about that reveal?
Yeah, I was confused because, like, I think I texted you that one day. Like, did she just like decide
Yeah,
I
I'm
don't,
good.
I want my powers back? So it was. I like it. The biggest relief for me is I feel like we are going to avoid 201. Like that's what this episode did for me. So she might still take the leadership of the team, but not
Yeah,
without
not.
powers. It was what I did like, that the creepiness of the adversary.
Yeah.
And I'm not I like the sound. There's been a lot of the sound design of the show that I really like, and I would assume that the voice of the adversary is probably constructed by layering some of Storm's own voice acting over it.
Mm,
You kind of hear it at times. Sometimes she's like directly mocking her or whatever, and you can see it. But I thought, like in terms of the way it moved, the way it spoke, like
yeah.
it did very much seem like I'm that trickster kind of demon. Like I obviously I can't there for whatever reason I can't just obliterate you, and in maybe
Mhm.
this case because I feed off your energies or whatever.
Mm,
But it had a very creepy demonic nature of it that made it an interesting thing. Like you could, if there was a retcon and this was all in her head, you could still buy that, because that
right.
was fundamentally what this was about. This was about Storm, reconciling who she was, and what she was at her core, which is a story that's been told in over a course of a number of books just outside of Life Death as well. Like
Mm,
even the transition to the Mohawk, her reconciliation with what it meant to be the goddess, and all
mhm.
those things. So it was definitely a Storm story. I think condensing it, not a bad thing.
Yeah.
What we got was, I think, fine.
Yeah.
It does feel like they artificially made it seem like a longer story just by sticking something in the middle of it.
Right.
But the whole reveal of like, oh, you know what, I'm done. I want my powers back. That was
Yeah.
kind of weird.
Yeah.
So,
I agree about the creepiness of the adversary and the way it's filmed as well, or the way it's animated with its head turning. Like, I mean, it's
mm,
it's kind of creepy, for a Saturday morning cartoon or a
mm-hmm.
Wednesday 3 o'clock in the morning cartoon. Um, yeah, so it was fine. Out of that, Forge also gets bit, and has this demonic whatever going through his shoulder, and
The
it's this
fever.
attempt to save. I mean, I think we've said this about a bunch of things. It was like, well, that was the best life death story they could have probably told.
Yeah, yeah.
That's basically what it is. Like, if you had given too much, it probably would have been too much, and you probably hit it right on the nose. And it feels like, hey, we need to have like a Storm centric story in this season because she's such an important
Mm-hmm.
character. And again, honestly, colors of or characters of color shunned in many and all like versions of media. So let's give her a story that people have there. We have Forge in it as well. Everybody knows that they have this version of a love story or whatever. We got Bishop out of here, so we don't have that weird part of it. So yeah, we're good. I'm like, okay, that's fine. I had no real problem with it, moving forward. And then, when Forge does recover and they send it off at the end of or part 2, like, is he using Doctor Strange powers?
It
Because it
definitely
certainly
it
looked like it.
Yeah, it definitely did. Like with the all the rings and the lashing and things
Yeah.
like that. Yeah,
And the
for
book
sure.
on the floor, was that the dark hold?
I would have to think not. Like he just attributed it to, unless there's many instances of the Darkhold, which I don't believe that there is. He
Okay.
attributed it to his, what he said. My mom practiced desert magic, and some of it
Yeah.
stuck. Yeah, like
Oh, yeah.
they layered in some
Yeah.
throwaway lines on this just to like,
Yeah.
oh, we didn't forget. We just don't have time to fuck with it.
Practicing the white man's magic. What was
That's
that
right.
shaman's line or whatever from Alpha Flight? Oh god. That's John Byrne though, so we can slide on that one. Um, so as she goes out into the desert to search for his mama's freaking chicken soup recipe cure for his disease, the adversary does come back. We go that obligatory storm forced into a
Yeah.
claustrophobia situation. But again, she finds herself and finds the power within to be able to do that. And she's able to send off the adversary as she goes through it. And as her transformation is, again, I call it her lemonade moment here. Like Beyonce, she transforms back into her OG Dave Cockrum costume, and it was like, what? All right.
Yeah, was not expecting like the culmination of her journey was to get her back to where she started in the book.
Yeah.
But I was definitely hyped. I was like,
Yes.
"Oh shit." Yeah,
Eh,
so because her, I think the all black outfit was, I think that was a gold era transition, and then it just kind of weirdly transformed in the comic to the same thing but white, which
yeah.
never really made sense. And then so I don't know. Her outfit seemed kind of generic
Mm.
in the original run and in the early parts of this. So yeah, no, this was a welcome addition, but yes, completely unexpected.
Yeah, I'm like, oh, okay, all right. I mean, and again, the design looked great. They did it the way they did it. That's fine. I have no problem with it. Does that mean we get a return to everybody else? I guess is wearing their costumes that we would be used to. I guess,
I mean,
right?
Cyclops is still in his Jim Lee era.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Um, I guess the next hurdle is, are we going to get Racer X, which seems
Mm.
increasingly likely. They're going to try and fuck him up somehow. So
Yeah. Yeah. So she goes back. Love is in the air. They're like, hey, you know what? Let's go off to a desert island. She's like, that doesn't sound like a bad idea. They turn the TV on,
yeah,
and then they get to see the
let me check some
destruction of
news real
Genosha. So I
quick.
hope you weren't going there.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, because that would be bad. But that's life death, y'all. Again, we did it in 6 slides, 5 if you don't count the title. Um, I mean, I have no problem with it. It seems like a get us from point A to B type of story. It did that. I can't really complain. It's just, again, if you're a reader of the comics, you're gonna be like, well, that seemed like kind of quick, but probably the best life death story we could get.
Yeah, I mean, I think you miss out on like, she was depowered for a total of 4 issues,
Mm,
and she did not appear in all those 4 issues or
mm,
episodes here. So you
yeah,
you miss out on, Storm. Part of who she is now is from that experience,
right.
which went pretty quick. But in terms of storytelling, you can, in much the same way that you always want to reflect on Jean being the Phoenix, you probably
Mm,
always want to reflect on Storm having lost her powers,
mm,
so that she could survive without them. So okay, I mean, it feels like they're just like, we need to put the core elements of these characters. We need to
mm,
depict the core elements of these characters so that everything's there and we have all our tool set to play with. That's what this show feels like.
right. Let me tell you something about black comic book fans of X-Men. Um, let's say they decided to give Storm this particular story where she lost her powers and tried to do it over the course of this series. Um, that wasn't gonna work for me, brother. Um, that would not have floated. As
No.
much as that story is tied into who she is as a character, you just established her as an Omega level mutant finally to put
Hmm.
a nail in that coffin in episode 1. Yeah, we're just gonna take her powers away for the rest of the time. This is, yeah,
Fair enough.
no, that wasn't gonna work. So again, life death, y'all. But in the meat in between that sandwich is essentially X-Men 275.
Mhm.
Essentially. If you've gone back, I think this is one of the last Jim Lee books before he images off. Not too much later. $1.50 for comics, bro. For $1.75 for a double size, no less. Jeez.
Wow.
Yeah. This is the story. So we have to go back to
Hey, what's that over on the left side of the screen?
what, Captain America.
Magneto.
Oh yeah. Oh,
Or-
well, above Captain America. Hey now, I we don't get a chance to appreciate what they did at the end of that series, the original X-Men, because it's awful. Like I didn't get a chance to watch those episodes until they said, "Oh yeah, it picks up right after that episode ends." So you go in and you watch that final episode of the original series, or when it aired, and they do like this, this the death of a dream, I think is something the title of it, and Xavier dies, but he doesn't really die. He goes off with the Shi'ar, but the X-Men all believe that he's dead. And then when episode one picks up, leaves the school to Magneto, and then we're off to the races in '97 here. But we know he didn't die. The comic books know he didn't die. And so telling the story where he goes off with his space boo, Lilandra, picks up really right in this particular episode, and they use a lot of the imagery from here. Thankfully, not the yellow and blue costumes,
oh,
which I
come
hated.
on. I love the yellow and blue. These were
Oh my
great.
god, no way! Ugh, I cannot. I never liked them. They should never be dressed alike. I just never
Oh,
fear. I
I
never
love
liked
this because, and there was like storyline for this because they were almost all the X Men were like gone or missing, and it was down to like Forge and Banshee, and he might have
them.
been
Yeah.
depowered at the time. So Forge came up with these uniforms because it was like body armor. It was their equivalent of unstable molecules, and they all rocked it. I like this. I like
Yeah.
these costumes.
Yeah, again, and this is Jim Lee at peak powers here, at least peak 90 powers. Like, his ability to, his attention to detail, he could draw faces. He's
His
the
ability to
uncoopered.
draw women bending their
Yes,
back in half.
yes. I mean, he's at his peak powers here. Um, but this book leads us into this particular episode. Did you ever go back and watch that final episode?
I did. It's so hard
Okay,
to watch because the
it's
animation is
rough.
so bad.
Yeah,
It
it's bad. It's really bad. And so, yeah, they think he's dead. He's off with Lilandra. And again, like y'all saw him take her away. Why'd y'all think he was dead? Nobody called Lilandra on the phone.
They don't know the rule. They should have learned it from episode 5, but no body, no death. No corpse, no death. I mean, they should
Yes.
have known.
I think that's a straight line from Psych. No body, no case, Sean. No body, no case. All right. So yeah, so that's where he is. They believe him to be dead. He's out with Lilandra
These
with the
people have
Shi'ar.
obviously never read an X-Men comic.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the X-Men have never read an X-Men comic book in their life. All right. And so we go out to space, y'all, and we get an attack on the Kree by the Imperial Guard led by Deathbird. And this, attack on the Kree starship in there. And I got hyped. The action sequence here is great to see, even though like every time that we see them, they're beating up the X-Men. To see the Imperial Guard there was
Yeah.
like kind of hype too. I was pretty excited to see this particular
I
segment.
swear, like some of the like I feel like Guardian or Gladiator, like in this episode, is like they just picked up frames from the previous run and put it in. Like all his moves, I'm like, I
Yeah,
think I've seen him do that before. What?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're on YouTube, the whatever shot, that they had when they were introduced fully, dope. And then you tie it into kind of where we haven't been able to finish it or whatever, but like X-Men '97, that's a Deathbird Lilandra story too. Where Deathbird winds up, being one of the last people and joining up with the X-Men to figure out, and that leads to the Phalanx Covenant, which is garbage. But a little bit of a tie into the year that was actually going on. And so we have to have this conversation about Deathbird. I'm a fan. I'm a fan of Deathbird.
Uh,
You not a fan?
Not really. Like, so what her intro, right? She shows up and nearly kills Hutch's boy Colossus, if I'm
Yes.
recalling correctly. So
Yes.
I
Stephanie
buy
Brooks.
her as like the assassin, like bully sister, like, you know, comes in for holidays, gets drunk, spills over the table, and then like gets out and sends fake apologies afterward. I can buy all that, but like Deathbird, the villain that can like take down entire teams of people, no, I don't buy it.
Yeah. Well, it's she's doing the business of the Shi'ar there, and in the middle of that, or at the end of after like we talk about Ronan taking nothing but L's, by the way.
She like the Kree, like
Yeah.
yeah, they yeah.
Yeah.
Then
But
that's
if
the thing. Like he's supposed to be powerful and has his ultimate nullifier or whatever. He just got. She was like, "Oh wait, I gotta hold on. I gotta put this bitch down so I can
yeah.
take." So my phone ringing, y'all. I gotta finish this business. Just throws him to
I
the
mean,
ground.
he's got beat up. He got beat in a dance off.
Yeah. Did they
Um,
specifically say this was Ronan? I think they did, but now I
yeah,
can't
they
remember.
did.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right. Because
they name
there may
checked
be
him and
many
everything.
accusers. There's like
Yeah,
Joe the accuser,
no.
Steve the accuser.
Ronan should hope there's a bunch of accusers because he definitely defiling the. I mean, they even referenced the
Accusing
Supreme
him of sucking.
Intelligence. Yeah,
Yeah,
they.
they did.
I
They
mean,
did.
well, and again, if you go back and read 275, spoiler alert for 30 plus years ago, it's a scroll story.
Hmm.
So if you're going to establish in there this, we've already gotten scrolls in the MCU, which I think completely suck. That they completely botched that completely to me. But you already got, introduced the scrolls in this too. Maybe this is where we're going with this. I doubt it. It would feel a little too secret invasiony, but I wouldn't hate it. But anyway, after she beats the hell out of
They did
the
ruin the Skrulls
oh yeah, it's
and the
completely
Super
ruined,
Skrull.
and there's no getting it back. By the way, you
No.
can. Why we're making scrolls the good guys? Come on, son.
I mean,
Um,
they almost gave us like a band of bad Skrulls, but then
mm,
they all got punked, and now Daenerys
ruined.
is the Super Skrull, but she has everybody. I don't know.
Yeah, ruined. That's a terrible show, by the way.
Yeah.
Anyway, so after they beat the hell out of everybody, Lilandra sends out a hologram, save the date that she's gonna marry gonna marry a Terran, y'all, and it's Charles Xavier. He's alive. He's walking. Via the technology there. He's got on the headgear that we see. Again, if you're on YouTube, on the cover of 275.
Mhm.
Like I mean, it's like when I saw that, I knew exactly what this was, and I could pull the issue. Normally, it takes me a little bit of time or Google, but I knew exactly what that was. I was like, oh yeah, I remember this story completely, and I also remember that there's freaking scrolls in it, and I don't think that's where they're going with this. But yeah, so they're going to get married, y'all. Charles is back. Now you've had a take about Charles and the X-Men for several years that he can't stay away. Like even when he's got it good, he has to go back and ruin their lives.
Yeah, he's they're typically better off without him, but
Yes,
yet they're dedicated to him. They're like it's a well, their that relationship is not functional in the same way like his relationship with Lilandra is not functional. Like
correct.
they're like, "Oh, I love you. You stole my heart. As
Mm.
long as you my little bitch and you don't go
Yeah.
back home." Like what is their relationship? I don't understand any of this.
Hi.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Hi, counselor therapist here. So we call this codependency.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So yes, it is a very codependent relationship on both sides, on Earth and in Shi'ar airspace. And reintroducing Charles back again, I think where this is headed, it's the perfect man, especially when we get to the end of this particular episode. Like, I think I know where we're headed, and it's fine. Like, this is a good comic book story to tell. You're out in space. We establish space is a thing, which they rarely did in the movies, except for in that terrible Phoenix movie at the end. Like, we've established that so we can reestablish it when we go, into the MCU movies. But yeah, but Deathbird was definitely like, what? Oh,
Yeah.
hell no. So they're going to go ahead and head back. Now, remember, this is interspersed in between Life Death, y'all. So we're kind of putting it together if you had seen it. Deathbird had time. when she goes back. And she reads Charles for filth, as the kids would say. Um, she's like, "Nah, do you not marrying this Terran? This lady's crazy as you're as crazy as the kin. His planet sucks." She called it the Milky Way ghetto.
She had another line later on where she said something like, "I don't want you to mix with his," and checks notes,
Yeah.
"inferior freak fluids." So I started to like Deathbird more in this episode just from the bomb she dropped on Xavier, who
Yes.
sucks.
Uh,
Yeah, she definitely
yes.
was. She scored some points in this one.
Yeah, she definitely had
The
time.
Milky Way ghetto. I was like,
Yeah, I
oh.
was like, man, I mean, and that, as you're not a Twitter person, and again, people are spoiling this crap at like 6 in the morning, and so you see like the trends. I'm like, what the? Why is Milky Way ghetto trending? What the fuck is that? And it's like, oh, I got it. Yeah, I mean, and again, it at least if whether you feel about Deathbird or not, they captured the sibling rivalry between the two of them at 100%.
Yeah.
As that comic book has gone on, it's always been a contentious relationship. Even when they're good, they're not, and this like captured that completely. And it's basically her thing is like he's just, and the rest of the Shi'ar, like he's just too loyal to Earth. Like that's his problem. He's too loyal to his X-Men. And so if you want to marry her or you want to marry him, he's gonna need to denounce Earth, or denounce his X-Men. They're gonna mind wipe his memory so he doesn't remember any of that stuff. And Charles agreed to this bullshit.
And they were like, they were like, well, fortunately, Lilandra is as strong a psychic as Charles Xavier. I'm like,
Like,
when did this
yeah.
happen?
Yeah. Yeah, that was a nice little throw in there. But I couldn't believe that he agreed. I mean, again, we're gonna get to this in a second. That he even would have agreed to it to begin with.
Well, in a
Yeah.
codependent relationship.
Oh yeah, I know. I said somebody on Twitter was like, "Man, the pussy ain't that good." Come on, Charles. Anyway, but yeah, there's going to be a rebellion though before we get to that particular point when Charles is supposed to denounce. He doesn't,
And
and his hesitation.
you stepped over it, but it looks like, so they used an exoskeleton for him to walk, but it looks like he's not, like, this is the window where he has his legs, but he can't walk very good.
Mm-hmm.
So that, I mean, that's, an interesting development in and of
Yes.
itself. And a lot of that happened around her anyway. So again, stuff from the books, they're just sprinkling in like just,
Right.
side shots in here, there, and there.
Yeah, that's when he was walking in the comic books and he was shooting basketball in his booty shorts. And
Yeah.
like, yeah,
And
okay.
he had his flash dance headband
Yeah, that's right.
in his big hutch socks
Yeah,
and his
that's right.
stocking shorts. Yep.
Awful. Yeah, yeah. Oof. But yeah, Deathbird definitely had the time to let everybody in the galaxy know what she thought about Charles.
Yeah.
And then, as this is going on, this rebellion, he just finally has enough. And he's going to take everybody to the astral plane to school them on the dream about, like, coexistence is messy. It's a struggle. It's all of these things. Now, again, you have to reconcile that with what we're going to hear in episode 7 from Beast, what we heard from Cyclops in episode 5 before Genosha, that Charles is still living in his dream world, which is kind of ironic. Yeah, we're going to live this dream of coexistence between humans and mutants, but I'm going to be out here in space. Y'all deal with that shit on Earth.
Mm.
But, the dream is still there. Whereas on Earth, they're dealing with, a massive
Right. They're
revolt.
dealing with reality on
Yes, the
Earth.
reality
Yeah.
of it. Correct. And so he gets them all the astral plane. He starts to teach the Shi'ar about that and coexistence. And, we're dependent upon one. You're not, more for me doesn't mean less for you. He's trying to get them to understand that. The artwork or the animation in this, amazing. And the capture of, again, we saw it in the original series, but, the capture of the Shi'ar that we know from the comic book and from the cartoon, like, I mean, pull 100% lifts. Like, I hope somebody's getting some residuals or whatever because they're really just pulling off characters that they designed. I'm sure they're not, by the way. Um, and then, but while he's doing that, there's this kind of Death Note moment across the astral plane, where he sees Gambit, fully in death. All his students turn to bones or whatever, and it's just like, what's going on? And it knocks him
Yeah.
down to his knees or whatever. What'd you think about that scene?
So I had two takes. One, like seeing Gladiator in class was definitely
Yeah.
not his element. He was sitting there sweating, like, oh shit, they gonna kick me off the team if I fail this test. Son, let me get those answers. No, it was hilarious. Like him there, he was like, I hope somebody else can pass this test for us.
Well,
But
to be fair, more than likely, if Gladiators there, it was probably court mandated.
yeah, it's true. But the other thing too was like the way he broke down the Shi'ar and their like colonization and like suppression of people to make
Mm,
themselves feel good. That was like that helped me put the Shi'ar in perspective for like maybe the first time ever,
mm,
because they've been kind of the good guys but kind of the bad guys, and yeah, they're bird people but they're kind of generic and they have
mm,
technology, we know that, but what are the Shi'ar? And his description of them is like these people who like bring other cultures under their wing and then like handicap them so that
mm,
they can't outshine anybody. I was like, okay, I kind of understand the Shi'ar, because like you get the Kree, they're warlike, survival of the fittest, whatever. You
mm,
get the Skrull, they're sneaky, uh but like I could never really had a good feel for the
mm.
Shi'ar until like he broke it down here, so that was useful for me.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a powerful enough scene even before you get to the end.
Hmm.
When I'm watching it, I'm like, how's this gonna end?
Yeah.
Like is all gonna walk out together singing "Kumbaya"? Like you wouldn't think that this would be enough, even though Lilandra is like, after he gets the death note, he's like, yeah, bitch, I gotta go.
Yeah.
Like I can't stay here no more. Like this everything on Earth is absolutely terrible,
Yeah.
and I gotta go. She's like, but you had almost convinced them. He's like, I gotta go. Like that's
Yeah,
it.
like he
Like I had back
convinced
to
them, but
Earth.
he hadn't convinced himself, because it
Right.
was bullshit for him to agree to that anyway, because he's more codependent on the X-Men than he is on the Shi'ar.
Correct. I mean, yeah, they're
But
carrying
I
his
think
name.
the Gambit as Death, I think, reinforces the theory that he's probably going to come back via Horseman of Apocalypse. Although they do still seem to be steering away from Apocalypse, that does not
Yeah.
necessarily seem to be the him that Cable warned us about. But
Correct.
also, like Gambit's not really one of his students, so like for
Right.
him to be like have emotional breakdown over Gambit,
Mm,
that's a little bit of a stretch. I mean, I
right.
guess you via Gambit you have the death of these millions of people or whatever, hundreds of thousands of people,
Mm,
but Gambit was not. He doesn't have a long history with Xavier. He
was
was
it?
mostly around when Xavier was gone, actually.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, when he gets introduced. So yes, he leaves, gonna head back to Earth. Deathbird's like, or she's like, you're gonna prove Deathbird right. He's like, I'm out, boo. I can't take
Nah.
him.
Yeah.
And then our post credit, we get to see Bolivar Trask running, and then he winds up getting tracked down by Sinister. He had given, the what his DNA or whatever for them to start this Sentinel program or
The
the
seed, son.
get the three-headed Sentinel monster thing in Genosha. I mean, again, Saturday morning cartoon. Like, please just kill me. Like, ooh, you don't hear that on Saturday morning
No.
cartoons. Uh, he's like, just kill me, please. And it
Yeah, the
doesn't
one
happen.
thing they've avoided is, they've given us two stories involving, some depiction of demons slash hell that they've skirted around, because the
Mm,
Goblin Queen, they didn't really draw that connection, even though they were in a subterranean area filled with lava and winged like demonic
and
creatures. They stopped short of calling her Demon Goblin Queen
yeah,
of Hell or whatever.
exactly.
And the adversary is just this probably Native American story,
Mm.
whatever. Like, so I think that seems to be like the heaven and hell aspect, and the divinity is one line they don't want to cross, and that's probably for international appeal, if I had to guess. But
Well,
everybody
Sinister makes
dies,
this.
so people
Yeah,
die everywhere, so we can talk
yeah,
about death.
everywhere.
But, yeah.
Well, Sinister makes his reappearance, and we that leads us out of this particular episode And it's like, oh, okay. And much like it has in a lot of the follow up episodes or whatever, like Genosha leads into nothing to talk about Genosha, essentially.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Life Death leads to this story that has to the end of Genosha or whatever, has nothing to do with Life Death. Like, it's like, okay, where are we going here?
Yeah.
And so you would think that episode 7 is going to be like, oh well, Xavier just, got on the Millennium Falcon and, was headed back to Earth. Nah, son, it's Bastion. All right, so we were talking before, and we're not gonna review episode 7 other than in global terms here. Like, Bastion has been revealed at the end of this to be the big bad. That was the books with OZT. I'm like, oh, that's Operation Zero Tolerance. Like, I knew what it stood for. I'm like, but I don't remember the books all that much because I don't remember like this being this freaking great X-Men story that was told that I would go back and read. I just remember like, oh, he was another dude that was kind of like a sentinel or something like that, and that was it. So they're revealing him now as the big bad for season 1, the one that's been controlling all of this. My thing is like, hey, I think this is going to lead to Krakoa. I've been saying this because when Beast gets to Genosha and Trish Tilby tries that bullshit with this, like, hey, come walk with me, hold my hand. I think the line is like, maybe tolerance was a mistake, essentially.
Hmm. Hmm.
Maybe trying to get your approval was a mistake from Beast. And I'm
Yeah.
like, that's interesting. And then we already had Scott be like, yo, like, this is ridiculous. Like, y'all normal people are fucking up. And I'm kind of sick of this. And then we have Xavier again in a random headgear. I think I think the clues are all there. And I think that's where we're headed. So you had an idea like maybe Bastion letting in this Krakoa type era. If you read the Krakoan books, like an Orcus type situation, an
Yeah.
advanced sentinel maybe from the future.
Yeah, I mean, I also don't remember Bastion very well, but I think it's partly because he was primarily revealed in the crossover era
Mm-hmm.
and or the era where it was, the start of the more art is more book era and
Mm-hmm.
less story is more book. So more like the kind of just the era of the artist more so than the writer. So I think it
Yeah.
was a visual. He is some sort of he was layered underneath the Friends of Humanity or whatever, I think, and some kind of Sentinel or whatever, and it was just basically another mutant tolerance episode. But this was well in advance of where Nimrod and or Master Mold was much more organized. So
Mm.
if you're going to have Krakoa, you have to have Orcus. And so to me, this is potentially a way to bring up, the machines as the enemy, although they haven't really given us the other elements of that, like AIM and Hydra and even
Mm.
Shield, the human aspect, the human science part of that as well. So I think you can do more with him if you're getting to that era than they ever did with him in the actual run.
Mm.
Because I don't think we've revisited Bastion in the modern era, but
No, we
how would
haven't.
you know? So,
Yeah, exactly. Well, we personally haven't. And so you have this, and what you're saying too, like, oh well, if you have all of these human elements that are like kind of biting up against the X-Men, well, you have a human team, metahumans of
hmm.
Avengers, but then they're led by Captain America, who makes an appearance in this with Rogue.
Hmm.
And it's just like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Even though they kind of had spoiled it ahead of time. And he basically gives the Avengers line like, hey, well, that seems to be y'all business. We got to handle
Right.
this by the book. I mean, it's a running joke on our
Yeah.
podcast that, like, yeah, so the X-Men are facing this big threat, and they called the Avengers like, hey, we get some help. And we're sorry. This number that you reached is no longer in service.
Please call the Fantastic Four if you need
Yeah,
assistance.
exactly. I mean, they just leave them out to dry, and so they established that too. I was like,
Hmm.
I think I know where this is headed.
Yeah.
And your definite warning from the previous podcast: please don't do Avengers versus X-Men. I agree with that too, but I think we're going to, Genosha had to die to let Krakoa live, And I think with Xavier coming back, seeing that his dream is literally up in flames and nobody's there willing to help them, the same with Senator Kelly and Cyclops too. Like, hey, wait, we did enough. Like, shit, yeah, we did enough. The optics of this look bad. And he's like, what?
Yeah.
I think that's where we're headed.
Yeah. Well, the other theory I've seen starting to bubble up is this is a bridge into Onslaught, which I don't know how that works.
Yeah,
Because that's
yeah,
yeah, I just don't think that's going to work. Now, if it's Professor X is a villain, I think there's ways to do that. That maybe Professor X becomes the villain and Cyclops kills him, and that case,
mm,
so because I feel like they're at most going to bastardize some of the bridging stories
right,
here, but I don't know. Like, I like what I like about Bastion as apparently the big bad of this is he's not been overused.
right,
We've seen a lot of Magneto as the villain. We've seen a lot of Mr. Sinister as the villain. We've seen a lot of Apocalypse as the villain. We haven't seen, Bastion as an organized villain because whenever we've gotten Nimrod stories, just he's the ultra powerful robot. We haven't
mm,
seen Nimrod, the calculating entity who is, architecting, in addition to the fact that he can destroy any individual threat, also architecting genocide against mutants. So
mm,
that's the piece of this we haven't seen yet, and that seems to be more consistent with the story that they're leaning into in this show.
right, yeah. And again, the writer of the show said, go back and watch One Man's Worth, like before we get to the 3-part finale. Again, that's where Shard,
Yeah.
no, yeah, Shard and Bishop have to go back and save Xavier from 1959, and from blowing himself up. But again, the character designs are pretty much from the Age of Apocalypse. But he said that wasn't going to happen. I didn't think about Onslaught there, but it would have been a perfect time to see like Xavier lost his mind there when everybody died. That would have maybe could have sent him over the edge. But I don't. I'm not ready for an Onslaught story. And they've revealed, if you look online, that Bastion's been in like almost every
Hmm.
episode, in the background and all of this. I'm like, oh, okay. So you've been alluding to this, which is great. But I mean, it's going to be new for us too. I'm like, I'll dig out those books at some point in time and go back and read this. But it wasn't like, though, oh my God, you remember Operation Zero Towers? That was like, it's not
No.
one of those X-Men stories, y'all, at all. It was just another story that happened in the 90s. If it was probably the 90s, I would assume. So I'm okay with it. I'm fine. I had no problems with episode 7. Like it was good enough. The ending was kind of wild, and Rogue's gone rogue.
Are we going to do a recap episode of that at some point?
Yeah, we will,
Okay.
because I
All right.
I think what's going to happen, since the finale is 3 parts,
Mm-hmm.
it's probably going to be like, all right, well, we're going to pick this up whether either in the middle or at the
Mm-hmm.
end,
Mm-hmm.
because it's all it's going to do is just a bunch of cliffhangers here. But we'll either start it and then end it and leave the one in the middle. I'm not really sure. And again, in a whatever world, you probably run all 3 episodes in a streaming world at this point, but
Yeah.
that's definitely not what's going to happen. Like, I
No.
know that for a fact, but
They gave
yeah.
us the double hit up front. I don't think we're
Yeah,
going to get
yeah,
too
and then maybe
crazy
if
that
it
way.
was the 2-part finale, like Night of the Sentinels, in the original series, maybe if it was 2, but 3 episodes. I'm curious that they're gonna make Bastion this big bad, because I don't know if we get that view in the comic book as something that we really saw, but it's fine. I mean, you had to be hyped to see your boy Captain America in it.
There wasn't the best depiction of him,
it
but you know,
were it
whatever.
it tracked though.
Yeah, I mean, no, the interaction between Rogue and I haven't read a lot of these, but this is the United Avengers or whatever they were.
Yeah.
So the interaction of Rogue and Captain America as like almost like peers, that
Mm,
was that was cool. I
yeah.
mean, they Rogue is other than Beast, who has had his moments, and Wolverine, who is complete set dressing at this point,
Whew.
and Morph, who is uh comic relief still.
Yeah.
I don't know if we're the
Well, yeah, he's
principal.
well, what is he's we need to get this cameo in relief at this point.
Yeah,
Quicksilver this week.
the main cast: Rogue, Gambit, Cyclops, Jean, Storm have all, gotten big moments. I mean, this
Hmm.
is, this is not just them hitting something hard and using their powers. This is like character development that I think has attracted us to the X-Men for all this time.
Yeah.
And so there have been big stories, big arcs for the main, the core X-Men characters,
Hmm.
that we haven't gotten in a lot. So this is, it's great.
Yeah. Again, first round pick, y'all. It is definitely worthy of it. I find myself going back and watching them in pieces. It's like, you know
Mm.
what? Let me go back and see just five or just six, but just the 275 part. Like, I don't want to see the life death stuff. Just skip
Hmm.
through it. Just trying to, kind of focus on the story and see where it's going ultimately, but also not knowing and being okay with that too. Again, I hate and love the one episode at a time aspect all at the same time. Because
Yeah,
I think we've been spoiled by streaming
yeah,
so much. And if this wasn't a show like that I was like really like into, and I didn't follow a bunch of people that would spoil it, I'd probably wait in between issues or episodes just because you're like,
yeah.
you know what, I like to watch it in bulk, or, in a block now, because to keep the story together in my head. But A plus
Yeah, and
show.
I think too the cliffhangers aspect of this, where they've broken up stories, I think is a little bit artificial in some cases too. And I
Yeah.
think then that disjointedness is exacerbated by the fact that they're only giving us one a week.
Yeah, the
Like
week long thing.
it wasn't so much like we took the main arc up to a point. Now let's spend 2 to 3 episodes to catch up with where everybody was, doing at this time. It kind of is, but not really. It
Right.
feels like I keep making the joke like I think only half the production team was given the information
Yeah.
that it was 22 minutes instead of 30, and then they
Yeah.
just had to put them all together.
Yeah.
So it feels like it might have been, they could have maybe blocked out the stories a little bit differently from
Hmm.
episode to episode,
Right.
because it does feel like time passes because they want you to wait to get the
Yeah.
rest of the story more so than it makes any kind of narrative sense. But
And that was the other part. And like I said, we're wrapped almost to an hour. So this is where I wanted to say this. Um, so the recap or the cap over there, besides the freaking ridiculous song that plays out on the outro there, so Bastion has Magneto,
mm-hmm.
but we saw Magneto die on Genosha, allegedly.
Nobody.
Yeah, nobody, no case, Sean. Nobody, no case. But could that have been Joseph?
Oh,
That would be right up with 97 in the comic books. And I'm trying to figure out how you're gonna thread that needle, because the Joseph story is really weird, and we haven't told the story of the mind wiped Xavier or mind wiped. You know what I mean? Like, we haven't
yeah.
gotten anywhere there, but I'm
W-
wondering.
But we have Sinister cloning peoples, and
Correct.
he's in the story. So,
Yep. And we already have Madeline floating out there as a clone too. So I wonder if we saw the death of Joseph, and Joseph was the one leading the X-Men
mm,
with all the implanted memories that
mm,
he was supposed to have,
mm,
and he died. But then we have the real Magneto with Bastion there, giving him a freaking very Silence of the Lambs shave at the end
yeah,
with that freak. I was like, this is kind of creepy. Like, this
was
would have not floated on Saturday
yeah.
morning, y'all.
Yeah,
That's super
and I
creepy.
don't recall like Bastion ever having some of the nuanced, villainish
Yeah.
characteristics that he's shown here. And so I
Mhm.
think we are getting, we're getting, uh, almost a unique version of him for this show,
Yeah.
just drawing from source material for the design and maybe
Right.
some of the concept.
And
I
I'm
can't
fine with.
remember did when he's getting his shave, although he takes the razor to him, and I never saw it. He still had his
Yeah.
like 2:30 o'clock shadow or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
But did he still did Magneto still have his purple like stripper outfit on? I can't remember what it
Yeah, I
what
think he
the
did.
yeah.
No, I think he had on his business suit from where he died in Genosha. I think.
Mm.
Might have to go back and
Oh,
check.
okay.
Yeah, I think he still had that suit on, which would be
So
weird then.
that would undercut your theory, but
Yeah.
it's an interesting one.
Yeah, it's there's something weird going on with that, obviously. All right. All right, y'all. So we'll be back. Not quite sure. It's probably going to be like, on our Bengals thing, we have what, like, oh my God, Joe Burrow's throwing again. Emergency pod, emergency pod, emergency pod. So it's probably going to be one of those things because if something happens, if they name drop Krakoa in episode 8 or some shit like that,
Hmm.
remember? Yeah, emergency pod. Yeah, we couldn't wait. We're just going to put it together, and I think that's probably where we are for the most part, and we'll kind of get through this. But it's been great, y'all. I think X-Men leads into What If season 3, I believe. I'm not crazy. And then whatever that plays out, and then season 2 for this is supposed to premiere. I thought I heard it in late 2024, but I could be completely crazy.
I
But we'll
wonder if
see.
they're going to pull now X-Men characters into What If, which would be amazing.
Oh no, they're supposed to be in What If.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
great.
yeah, in season 3. Actually, might make me watch it. So,
Season 2 was not great. Season 1 had some decent ones, but season
yeah,
2 was
yeah, it's really weird. It's a weird show. It's what's that kid expression? It's doing too much. Like it's doing way too much. So, all right, y'all. All right, so that's it. We'll be back shortly thereafter. And we'll go from there. So, as a producer, I'm signing off. X-Men animated music is playing out on the podcast side. I'm going to sign off. Go ahead and sign off, Brother Beavis.
see y'all next time.
Maybe we'll get my brother to finally watch this show, by the way.
I
Who,
doubt
who,
it.
who knows? Doubt it. All right.
Not
Peace,
until his
everybody.
boy shows up in it.
That's fair. Peace, everybody. Good job. Good effort. Oh, wait. I did not stop the record. I'm going to have to exit that out. I hit the